Hi, my name is Hector Ricardo Albertos. I normally go by Ricardo, and I will be presenting this tutorial presentation that I call Unpacking the TEKS, and it's for my curriculum leadership class, part of my master's program in the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. Today, we're going to be talking as part of this training for teachers to understand the idea of unpacking a standard and why is that important for us to understand the importance of this. This participant also be able to describe reasons that standards should be unpacked, collaborate with others to unpack a standard, and something really important too, how to reflect on how unpacking standards with students can personalize students' learning. Those are like the general ideas that we're going to be discussing. I'm going to be presenting some examples of how to unpack tags, different contents, but more than that, I want to give some details of why is that important to, especially if we want to close an achievement gap in our school. And let's start by defining some of the important concepts that I think it's necessary for us to understand in order to apply the concepts or understand the importance of unpacking the TEKS. Standards. Standards are TEKS, and TEKS stands for Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And it's very important that we know this, that it's not TEK, it's TEKS, and that S at the end of this acronym means skills, meaning that the TEKS or applying the TEKS is not only applying theory, but also skills. I'm coming from an educational system that is based in competences, and in my country we define a competence as a group of skills, abilities that students need to know to apply a concept. And that's something very similar that we have here in Texas. And these TEKS are assigned by the state of Texas to teach. So every grade level, every content has its own TEKS. So the TEKS is not as just theory. As students need to know how to do something. That is so important. They just don't need to know concepts or learning by heart some concepts, but the application of that concept. The next concept that I want to describe is curriculum. This is also normally designated by the district, and it has to be aligned or TEKS aligned. Like for example, in my campus, which is IDEA, and my district is IDEA Public Schools, the district gives us what is the proper curriculum that we need to follow, and they are TEKS aligned. And instruction, well, that's what we as teachers do. Is the art of teaching and is used to help students to meet standards by following the curriculum. And also so important part of this process is the assessment. And we know that for example, in Texas, the state has its own assessments like the STAR exam. And normally that exam, it's based also in the TEKS, and it's for checking understanding on our students. And it's so important that we understand these four concepts, because once we understand the importance of each one of these, it will be easier for us, and our lesson plans are going to be better, and we are going to close the achievement gap. But most importantly, we're going to set up our students for success. The three components must be aligned to the standards. And by this, in the previous slide, I was mentioning that the instruction, the curriculum, and the assessment, they are part of the learning process, and they cannot be independent from each other. They have to be completely connected. Our instruction needs to be it needs to be aligned with the curriculum, and of course the curriculum needs to be aligned with assessment. What we have seen in some other schools, or what I have seen in some other schools, is that sometimes maybe the curriculum, it's not completely aligned to the assessment. And for example, this was something that I brought up at my campus, because we were using previously for math a curriculum that it was not TEKS aligned. Actually, the format that the teachers were presenting their instruction or delivering their lessons, it was not the same format that students are facing at STAR. So when I was having this conversation with my senior principal, I said, maybe that's why our students are failing so bad in math. So for this year and the following, we changed the curriculum to one that is TEKS aligned. So these three components, the curriculum, the instruction, and the assessment, they need to be completely aligned in order to achieve our goals. Now, having access to TEKS support document is the key for teachers. Having a proper template and instructions about how to go is very important, and these are the few platforms from they can get these things. Lean Forward, the website of Texas Education Agency, or an ISD Technology Division. For me personally, I would prefer the Texas Education Agency website because it's the best platform, at least in my opinion, to find the TEKS related template and information. But other websites also provide similar support, so it depends on choice of the teachers. For example, if we, in the previous slide, I was talking about the curriculum, the instruction, and the assessment. And one part of the assessment, it can be really reflected if we go to the website of Lead Forward. Once we develop our lesson, once we unpacked or break down the TEKS in parts, as we are going to explain in this video, we're going to also have the opportunity to understand that the assessment is also part of that instruction, and Lead Forward can help us completely to that. So in this slide, I'm presenting a TEKS math for a grade, and I choose to start with this TEKS 4.1 because what I have noticed, at least in my campus, is that fourth graders are the most critical in the results from the STAR exam. So this is a major issue that I have found in fourth grade math students. For example, these standards in particular calls for students to extend their understanding of place value related to multiplying and dividing by multiples of 10. Just by the concept of multiplying, students in fourth grade, after COVID and all of these situations, yes, students are completely lost at this point, especially in elementary. In so many cases, some of them are like completely lost. They don't have this kind of culture that we want in our students. And by exposing them to the multiplication concept, base 10 idea, well, and sometimes it's really, really challenging. In this standard, for example, students should reason about the magnitude of digits in a number. And students should be given opportunities to reason and to analyze the relationships of numbers that they are working with. For example, this year, I'm doing intervention for students in 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And when I started this school year, and this was part of the concept of one of the TEKS, I had to use 4 different techniques or approaches to make my students understand. Just by theory, sometimes they don't visualize, they don't understand the concept of base 10 or multiplication. So using different techniques, I could finally make them understand. So TEKS are broken down in 3 main components. We said that TEKS stands for Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, and the structure of TEKS is divided into 3 parts. We have first the strand or the general idea of my TEKS, and then the knowledge and skill statement, which is also kind of broad, not completely detailed, but then it comes the student expectation. And we're going to be referring during this presentation a lot about these 3 components: the strand, the knowledge and skill statement, and the student expectation. So let's get started. For example, the same format or the same idea that I presented before is the TEKS format math. As you can see here in this slide, we have math 4.2a. Interpret the value of each place. Value position as 10 times the position to the right as 1/10 of the value of the place to the left. So the student is expected to apply mathematical process standards to represent fractional units and explain fractional units. If I have my TEKS like this, maybe I need to breaking it down so I can understand where's my strand, where's my knowledge and skill statement, and what is expected from my students. And let's start with this. The strand, it's math, 4.2. The knowledge and skill statement is interpret the value of each place. And finally, I have the student applies mathematical process standards too. So my student expectations, it's two main things: represent and explain. To unpack the TEKS, I will mention three important parts. First, we need to identify the verbs for the depth of the thinking and cognitive alignment requirements. This is the lesson design. And normally when we have the TEKS in front of us, the first thing that we need to do is that identify the verbs. We're going to circle the verbs. We'll normally circle the verbs because by circling it, we are going to determine what are the actions or what are the things that we want our students to do. The second, it's to identify the concept for complexity of the TEKS. Normally the concept, we're going to underline it. The concept is the topic of the lesson, so this is the lesson content. And finally, step number 3, it's identify the context which the concept will be assessed. The context is the details of the lesson. So having in mind these 3 things, my verbs, my concept, and my context, is the first step for me to unpack the TEKS. Let's put it into practice. For example, going back to the same TEKS Math 4.2, we have the strand, we have the knowledge and skill statement, and we also have the student's expectation. What are the verbs, or what is the TEKS asking me to do? Well, first, remember, we need to circle the verbs. We need to interpret, we need to apply, or students need to apply, represent, and explain. Those are the main things that my students need to do. What do they have to interpret? They need to interpret the value of each place, which that is my concept. And normally my concept comes after my verbs. In the first one, what do they need to interpret? The value of each place. What do they need to apply? Mathematical process standards. What do they need to represent? Fractional units. And what do they need to explain? Fractional units too. So it's interpret, applies, represent, and explain. What about my context? Well, my context gives me my parameters. What is my final goal? And having them all together and analyzing the 3 parts of my TEKS, it's going to be easier for me, because if we don't do this way, teachers, we are not teaching completely the TEKS. And what is going to be the result? What is going to be the outcome? Well, when my student or my students get to the assessment part, they are going to fail, because probably I just helped them to apply mathematical process standards, but I didn't help them to represent, maybe with figures, maybe with diagrams, maybe with some objects, and maybe they didn't have the chance to explain. So all of these teachers, it can be the way that I want to present my TEKS. This is another example. Let's unpack the student expectation into smaller explicit statements. This is a TEKS for 5th grade science, organisms and environments. So the student knows this is my strand. Then I have my skills and knowledge statement. So the student knows that there are relationship systems and cycles within environments. And then it comes my student expectations, my SE. What is it expected for my student to do? To identify the significance of the carbon dioxide, oxygen cycle to the survival of plants and animals. One more time, the first thing that we have to do is circle the verbs, right? What are my verbs over here? knows, another verb expected, but more importantly, identify. What do they need to identify? They need to identify the significance of the carbon dioxide oxygen. That is going to be my concept. And then at the end, it's going to be my context, the one that shows my parameters to the survival of plant and animals. But if I just read my TEKS like that, and I don't analyze it, circling it, underline it, and boxing, that it's not enough. It's better if we breaking it down. My TEKS in my class, in my lesson plan, should be like this. Identify the significance of the carbon dioxide cycle to survivable plants. That is my first objective. And second, identify the significance of the carbon dioxide cycle to survival of animals. This is so important, teachers. We're talking about plants and we're talking about animals. Maybe I know more about animals than plants, and I can feel a little bit more related to the animals, and it would be easier for me to explain. And because of that reason, maybe I'm leaving out the plants. What is going to happen? What is going to be my outcome? My student is going to fail because I'm not teaching the TEKS completely. I need to breaking it down. Speed and direction. So if I have two verbs and two context, how many sentences do I have to be working with? 4. 2 times 2, 4. Demonstrate, it would be like this. Demonstrate how unbalanced forces change the speed of an object's motion. Also demonstrate how unbalanced forces change the direction of an object's motion. Now I'm talking about speed and direction by demonstrating. What about calculating? Well, I need to have 2 sentences about that. Calculate how unbalanced forces change the speed of an object's motion, and calculate how unbalanced forces change the direction of an object's motion. So if we do not address the 4 parts to develop my lesson, I have not taught completely my TEKS, and my students are going to fail in their assessment. And we don't want to do that. First, I need to breaking down my TEKS completely, and once I have it, I will be able to deliver a very good lesson. And as I was explaining before, I used to work in Mexico I've been into education for almost 18 years, and in my last 8 years I was coaching schools over there. And sometimes when I used to visit schools and have observation of the teachers from the schools that I used to visit, what I noticed is that in many cases teachers are afraid to deliver something that they are not completely related. For example, in Mexico, we still teach cursive letter starting in kinder and first and second grade. So in many of the cases, teachers were skipping this important part, even when it's proven that there are some cognitive benefits for students because of the brain connections of the cursive. Teachers were not doing it. So when I was analyzing this with the principal of that school, I got to the conclusion that in many cases it's because the teacher in front of that class, she was too young. So she was part of the generation where the reform in Mexico take out completely the cursive letter. So she never learned how to use cursive letter. What was happening? That she was not delivering a proper instruction. And that happens everywhere. Here, I'm sure that all of us as teachers, we have some preferences with some subjects. But if we follow the steps of the TEKS in breaking it down, that is going to help us to deliver our lessons in a better way. So why is this important? Why is it so important to unpack the TEKS? Well, by applying universal design for learning for all students, with this strategy, all students will be target universal design learning as a set of principles for curriculum development that gives all individuals equal opportunity to learn. when we understand this, that applying universal design, which is a concept of proactively designing a learning environment that allows all learners to access the content and curriculum to the greatest ability. Then comes the facilitate students-directed learning, in which academic instruction for all students should be based on curriculum that it's meaningful to learners. Chances are students remember the teacher who made math meaningful, science fun, or literature come to life. But this is part of our lesson plan, teachers. If we don't do it properly, our classes are going to be monotonous, they're going to be like repetitive, and we're not achieving our goal. Also, it is involving our students in their learning. It is important to develop engaged learners, especially with students who have moderate and severe disabilities. They are part of our class. We should include them. In fact, the best way to individualize academic standards is to develop programs that accomplish two things: align to the standards, and if my instruction is relevant to the student. If we don't involve our student, if we don't convince our student that this is important for the life, we're not going to make them understand, because it's not important to them. But if we put them into practice, which is a skill, that it's not only the theory, but put them or face our students to the real life, that is going to be a tremendous impact. Is it important for us to unpack the TEKS? Definitely. For example, I wanted to show you all in this last slide, as you can see, how the math proficiency in our district is below 47%. So it's clear. So it clearly shows that improvement is required, although reading proficiency is also same as math. But reading proficiency in our school is good, but math is the weakest point. So by applying this standard, the TEKS and training teachers will help to reduce this achievement gap in our campus, and hopefully this effort will improve math's proficiency in the district. That's our goal in our school. In IDEA, we want to close that achievement gap. We're constantly analyzing the data. Actually, we just had a meeting with our senior principal and our APIs, and we were discussing some of the strategies. But at the end of the day, what we got into the conclusion is that maybe we as teachers are missing some important parts in the point of unpacking the TEKS. Maybe we're not doing these steps of breaking down the verbs, the concept, and the context, and we're just delivering our lesson in a very methodic way. So this is the training that I wanted to show you, that I prepare for my curriculum leadership class, and these are some of the reference that my presentation is based on. Thank you so much.